Hey, what's going on? Eric Bach here with the Eric Bach Show, and today I sit down with my good friend Matt Blank. Matt helps driven professionals get into the best shape of their life and prioritize their health. Matt has been a coach for over 10 years, working with elite level athletes in the NFL and WWE, such as The Miz, Bautista, and NFL players such as Dwayne Brown. In this conversation, we break down how he got started working with elite level athletes, and then more importantly, the key lessons that you can take and transcribe directly into your health and your fitness so you can get in the best shape of your life, prioritize your health, and live true to your purpose. You're going to love this conversation. So drop us a comment, a 5-star review if you get some enjoyment out of it, and make sure you follow Matt at MattBlankFit on Instagram. Here we go. So you're from Mississippi, you're in LA, and how did you get involved training high-level athletes in the NFL, WWE stars like The Miz?
It's a long way from Mississippi, man. Yeah, I've been in LA for 8 years. Long story short, I had a really good opportunity. As we were chopping it up before, I did an internship at Exos. And so one of the head coaches from Exos took a job in LA working for, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jay Glazer from Fox Sports.
Yeah.
Yeah, he owned a gym out here in LA, and he really wanted to make it the number one place for off-season training. And so, long story short, pack up my bags, move out here. Halfway across America, I found out it's an unpaid internship, and I'm like, screw it, man. There's no turning back. I got to go. And so, end up in LA working with these guys, eventually get hired onto the gym. And so, we really crush it with the off-season training, right? And so, long story short, like this guy gets fired, like he just moves on. And so now I'm running the off season and stuff. And it's been a really cool opportunity. And so I definitely got to give Jay Glazer a shout out because he definitely funneled the clients my way, but I did a really good job of keeping them and retaining them. And so it's been awesome, man. You know, like now that I have my own business outside of that gym, when I stepped away, the Miz is still rolling with me. But back in the day, like we had Bautista, we had all these WWE monsters rolling through. NFL offseason, you know, we would have anywhere between 15 to 60 guys through an offseason. So it was just fun getting after it, man. It was a good time for sure.
No doubt. All right. So, with these WWE guys compared to like the NFL, at least in the gym, who would you say were like the biggest freaks in terms of like strength and power? I mean, probably WWE guys in terms of like sheer size and how jacked they are. It's a little bit different than the, football guys because they're more focused on the performance side. But what are some of the crazy things that you've seen?
Here's the thing. I think the WWE guys are like just that nice crossover of like functional bodybuilding, I'd call it, so it's like you see some cool stuff, right? Like I'll see 315 for 10 on the bench press or something like that. And that's impressive to me. But like, I mean, I worked with a guy for like 4 years, Dwayne Brown. He was the left tackle for the Houston Texans and Seahawks. And so this dude was doing 20 pull-ups at 330 pounds. And then we could get him to do 6 chin-ups with a 100-pound kettlebell. So to me, that is just freaky. He could pen lay row 405 for 8 reps. The dude had the strongest back I've ever seen, So you would just see stuff like that. And it's like just watching NFL linemen. Like I used to think like wide receivers or safeties are the most athletic on the field. But watching these linemen go through like, again, I'm not a fan of ladder drills, but every now and then we would just do it to make it entertaining and like warm them up just, once a month. And just watching the footwork at 330 pounds and just like throw a football, like make them run a route at the end just for a fun warm up. You're just like, this is nuts.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like the freakiest athletes, from my days, working with a lot of these guys, basketball, like NBA players are pretty freaky in terms of like what you see on the court, but you don't see as much of that directly in the specific training simply because like the weight room culture and that prep culture is a lot different than what it is, say, for the NFL. But man, like, yeah, you get a left tackle or you get like a pulling guard, you get an edge rusher. Like these guys are absolutely insane. And like I recall seeing like 10-yard 20-yard splits. Like you got to think about this. Like you think receiver's fast, you think a safety, you think a running back is fast, but like if you put some of these linemen and some of these guys that are in the trenches and they're doing like a 10-20, the difference is like a foot maybe. Like they're right on the heels of these elite freaky guys who are running like 4.3s 4.4s because that initial explosiveness that you need. And I think most people don't really expect that. And it's absolutely mind-boggling when you see it in person. Because I know, like growing up, man, I would be like, oh yeah, it's just like a fat lineman. Like, no, like that's a dancing grizzly bear who can move.
100%. No, that's a great analogy. And again, it's so true. It's right. Maybe they're 2 or 3 steps behind, but they have 80 pounds of extra body weight. And it's like that's a scary thing. And I think a dancing grizzly bear is probably the best analogy for that.
Awesome, man. Yeah. Yeah, it's something else. And so obviously, man, like you making that transition going, taking that risk. I mean, what was that like? Because I think that's such an important thing where I feel like now, I mean, the world has changed so much over the last few years that a lot of people are scared to take risks, and it makes sense. Right, like we've had a lot of fear, stuff like that, kind of pounded into our psyche. Not to get political here, but just in general. And then there's been different economic upheaval, stuff like that, where I think a lot of people are scared to take a risk. But about every person I've talked to who's doing what they really dreamed of had to take some risk without a guarantee of success. Like, what was that journey like for you?
Yeah, for sure, man. I always try to tell people, like, whenever I'm talking with people, the one quote that has always impacted my life is, this world calls you for comfort, but you were not made for comfort. You were made for greatness, right? And it's outside of that comfort zone is where all the growth is going to happen. And so, to be honest with you, I started at a place called D1 Sports in Memphis.
Yeah.
Yeah, so D1 Sports, well-known spot. There actually wasn't a job opportunity there. And so I get back from my internship and I'm like, I need to find some work, right? And so my friend was at D1 Sports and he was like, dude, there's no jobs. And I was like, screw it, man. I'm going up to this gym. Like, I know a lot of stuff, you know? And so I talked to the manager and I'm like, dude, just cut me. Like, let me do personal training. Like, let me just hang out at this gym. And anyone who wants to work with me, like, just, I'll give you the 50-50 split, which was just nuts, you know? I'm doing that. And then I'm like, yo, this is not Exos quality. You know, this is not what I'm used to. And so I actually get a call from the head coach of Exos. And he's like, I've got an opportunity for you, NFL offseason, but you got to be here in 3 days. And I'm just like, this is nuts. And then Rob Gronkowski steals the phone and is like, get your ass to LA. And I'm like, hey, man, where is there an LA in Arizona? He goes, you dumbass, I'm in Hollywood. And so I go in and quit. But long story short, over the time I was at D1, I grew the high school athlete program so big. And again, we were in just Memphis where there was a lot of gifted athletes, but a lot of them couldn't afford it. And so what I realized was I was like, there's very wealthy and very poor in Memphis. And so I
Yeah.
basically had the wealthy people pay for their memberships. And then the people who couldn't pay, I still brought them in and it just grew the program like crazy. And I think at one point, 12 of the 18 people all had D1 scholarships, which was just nuts, like big D1 scholarships. And so that was really cool.
It's so rewarding too as a coach.
It was awesome, man. Yeah, and I know I'm rambling on here, but where it came to a point of taking risk was I was just in that comfort zone that we were talking about, to where if I keep doing this, I know I'm just going to be this coach, which I don't want to be, right? Like I felt like I was called to train and work with the top athletes, and that wasn't going to happen in Memphis. So something had to happen. The opportunity was created. And again, I mentioned earlier, it was completely unpaid. So there's this point to where, do you roll the dice and say, this could happen and be really good for me? Or I looked at it and said, what's the worst case that could happen? I can always go back to Memphis. It's going to be there. So I decided to quit on that Thursday. I had to be there on Monday. So I'm driving out to California, and halfway to my journey, I think I was in like just crossing through Texas. I get a call from the CEO of D1 Sports and says, I will give you $25,000 to turn around right now. And dude, I didn't even have $2,000 in my bank account at the time. And so 25,000 was going to be such a big hit, but I knew that was just such a short-term thing and it wouldn't have fulfilled the dream that I had inside of me. So I respectfully turned it down, kept moving out. And like I said, it was a rough thing. I was sleeping on couches for the first, almost year trying to figure it out. I met a kid with a trust fund. This is such a funny story, who became one of my best friends. And again, being from Mississippi, I didn't even know what a trust fund was. So here's a funny story. I sat the kid down one day and I was like, dude, I worked super hard. How did you get a trust fund? And I had no idea what it was. But yeah,
That's
man,
amazing. Yeah.
I think everyone has to take the risk, right? Otherwise, you're always going to live with that regret, right? And it's like you said, every successful person has to take a risk at some point. And I think it all kind of goes back to that quote of just, you can have that comfort zone or you can try to chase that greatness,
Yeah. And I think that's a big thing too, as well, when people want to make a personal transformation, specifically with health, where it's a lot of people want to step forward and lean into something new, because when you transform your body, it is a transformative experience, not just for your physical health, but your mental health, can be for your professional life as well. And that's why we always say that, fitness is a force multiplier. I think one of the big issues that people have though is, you can't walk forward while keeping your back foot planted. And a lot of people will keep their back foot planted in their past experiences, their past relationships, even when they don't necessarily serve them. And even though they're comfortable, and even though they might provide that immediate gratification, a la, here's 25 grand, you didn't have a whole lot, right? And so I think it's one of the hardest things mentally for people is to leave that comfort zone, to be able to step forward into that person that they want to be, to act differently, whether it's eating differently, whether it's having conversations about like what your social life looks like. Maybe it's not being as social, or changes in relationships. Because again, if we want to be able to make these changes, we have to act in a different way. Because if we keep doing things the same way we always did, we can't expect different results. It's illogical.
It's like that quote, man, if nothing changes, nothing changes, and it's, I've always been a big believer, and this has kind of been my philosophy, is do the simple things savagely well. Right. And I think so many people, when we're talking transformation and changes, so many people just like commit to something and then try to go all in and change all of these lifestyles. And it's like, change the way they eat, change their gym routine, change their sleep routine. And it's like, it's almost too much in the beginning. And so I've always been like, again, one thing at a time, right? Like just start showing up to the gym. I don't even care if you work out that day. Just drive to the gym, get your feet in the door. And then if you just do one set of something, that's fine. Go back and do it again. And eventually you're in a routine, right? Where some people like jump right into 75 hard after haven't worked out for 5 years. And it's like, I don't believe in that principle. I know a lot of people like, you just got to jump into it, but it's like, that's never been my thing. And again, I'm a big believer in slow growth and just doing the simple things savagely well, and it's turned out okay for me.
Yeah, I mean, slow is sustainable, right? And I'm reading Adam Bornstein's book, You Can't Screw This Up. Great book, just a lot of it that really covers kind of diet culture and belief, and a lot of studies in terms of like, for example, what type of habits, what type of actions need to happen to really lose fat and do it sustainably. A great dieting analogy came from my buddy Mike Milner. Mind Over Macros, great podcast, by the way. And he's like, hey, like when it comes to dieting, it's like pulling a rubber band. The harder you diet, it's like pulling back that rubber band, the harder it's going to snap back. And so like the more restrictive, the more dramatic the shift that people take, oftentimes the bigger the backslide is. And so like in the realm of fat loss, there's a reason that 90% of people who lose 10% of their body weight, so someone who's 200 pounds loses 20 pounds, 90% gain it back within 3 to 5 years, right? And the reality is, if we're too restrictive, if we try to bite off more than we can chew, it's more than what we can handle in terms of habit change. And if you live life aggressively, so to speak, if you tend to grab life by the balls and just run through walls, I didn't even mean to rhyme right there. Man, I guess I got a rap career coming up. Anyway, that's really hard to do, right? It's hard to not go 100% all in on things right away. But I think what we have to understand is there's so many different factors beyond what's necessarily in our direct control, right? Because as life gets busier, it gets more stressful. We can't operate with the same exact expectations that maybe we did when we were 18, 22, 25, 30, when everything else has changed. And building on like what you said, I find it really interesting that like, both you and I have, a wealth of experience working with like world-class athletes. And we have that same belief of, I frame it as like success comes down to the ruthless execution of the basics. And I'm sure you were probably floored the first time you started working with elite level athletes that like people will see these cool videos on social media where it's like somebody doing a push-up with chains on a band. But you're talking about Dwayne Brown. Like what type of stuff did he do? Pull-ups. Pendlay row is it's basically a dead stop bent over row. It's basic compound exercises. It's hammering those things as 80% of what you do. And I think in general, people will like look for the fanciest workout to avoid some of these basic things that have been proven because it doesn't look as sexy. But the best athletes in the world, the people with the best physiques in the world, do most of that stuff. I mean, has that been your experience?
100%, man. And again, your philosophy is doing something basic, right? And that's my philosophy. A couple of my good friends are former Navy SEALs, and something they say in the SEALs is like, be brilliant in the basics, and there's this reoccurring theme of like, the basics kind of get you there if you just do it for a long time. If you want to increase your wealth and put money in the stock market, you can't just do it for 1 year. You've got to do it for 50 years, but you can stay in the same stock and just be simple, right? As long as it's this good growing thing. If I want to get stronger, I can just keep squatting and doing my pull-ups. And again, I can vary the reps and sets and stuff. But yeah, I think there's been this theme over the past couple of years of chasing views through complexity, right? Like if I do this Bosu ball, one-legged pistol squat with an overhead snatch while I'm slamming a med ball, that's going to get me views and make me a qualified coach. And it's like, me and you can go back and forth about this, where it's like, just because you have these views and stuff, it doesn't mean you're a quality coach. And to be honest with you, when I started this online thing, it's like, man, are people going to be upset that they're just getting squats and pull-ups? And then like, you have to just realize, if I'm going to get them the results, this is the best thing for them, So the way I always try to explain this is like, yeah, you might see there's a lot of hesitation. Is it just going to be squats and pull-ups, or am I going to get the real deal like what Dwayne's doing? And I'm like, Dwayne's still doing pull-ups, bro. And I always use this analogy as like, if I was to give a world-class grill master a steak, right, with the salt, pepper, and the same ingredients and same grill that I have, he could cook that steak 10 times better than I could, because he knows how to use the flame. He knows how to season it. He knows how to char it, where I think I know how to too. But when you're next to a real expert, it stands no chance, you know? And so a pull up is going to always be a pull up, but the way a true professional can program that reps and sets and the intensity and structure it in the workout, if you're just a guy with no plan walking into the gym, just doing some pull ups, like you might see a little progress, but it's never going to taste as good as that true grill master or true coach programming it in the proper structure or form for you.
Yeah. You know what? I can't recall where I saw this on social media. And it was somebody having a somewhat similar analogy. And they were saying, they had somebody who was interested in coaching. They're like, you know what? Like, I've just been picking like stuff off of YouTube and I think I've got everything I need. And his response was, okay, and let me ask you, like, what do you do professionally? And they were a pharmacist. And it was like, okay, like, well, I know a little bit about pharmacology and I can go find out a lot about what's going on, with different drugs and interactions and what does what, just by using the internet. Would you say that I could make recommendations and prescriptions to improve somebody's health with that information? Or would that be suboptimal versus having you tell me specifically what's going on based on a doctor's order and that prescription? And I think some of the issue in general with fitness is like there is a low barrier of entry. And I think there's such a visual component that people see somebody who's jacked and they're like, I'm just going to do what they do. And so particularly with social media culture and the way that content has become so short form, there's a lot of like, you see it, that's your first impression, this is what works, versus taking the journey that's been proven, even though it's slower and less sexy across the board.
Hey, it's hard though, man. I saw a jack dude at the gym the other day doing some curls in a weird way, and I was like, man, I might have to try that if that's what works.
No shit, man.
No, it's crazy though how the human eye, it just like, even though I always said it's like if you get like some jack dude like Batista who's just juiced out of his mind, right? And then you have like a guy like me who's fit, but it's like I'm not Batista fit. If Batista says do burpees and kettlebell swings and on Bosu balls, like you're going to listen to him over someone who's like, just, hey man, we're going to do squats and we're going to do pull-ups today. It's like, you want to do the crazy stuff because you think it's going to get you jacked, and it's not always the case. The muscle doesn't always match the truth,
Yeah. Well, in many cases, like where somebody is who's in elite level shape in that example, they are there because they built that foundation with different things. And they might be showcasing what their training is now. But we have to understand is like where somebody's training is at now, who might be 3, 4, 5 steps ahead, is not what's going to help you get to where they are. Like the classic example of is Arnold Schwarzenegger, like his beginning training, beyond the fact he has freak genetics, like a lot of people do have freak genetics who are insanely jacked, but like he built his foundation, 1, manual labor, 2, powerlifting, getting very strong in exercise like a bench, squat, and a deadlift. Like that's what he did before he got into bodybuilding. And if you actually look at his Golden 6 program, it's a total body workout routine with 6 exercises. It's like a squat, a row, a barbell curl, a bench press, just like the basic nuts and bolts. And so what got him beyond what 99% of people will ever look like, this is before competing in the Olympia, was all those basic exercises. Yet people will look at like the Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding or like his later workouts that were 2 to 3 hour marathon sessions, and they want to start there after they don't have that foundation. And this foundational component of like building strength with a lot of these basic things is so important because again, if you don't have a sturdy foundation on a building and a big storm comes by, it doesn't matter what the inside looks like, that shit's going to get destroyed. Conversely, if you have something that's actually built to weather the storm and it can withstand all that, then you're going to be in a much better position. And I think a lot of people get excited by the glitz and the glamour of what somebody who's very elite is doing without understanding the context of what really got there.
100%. And it reminds me of that parable in the Bible, like a house built on rock, that firm foundation, it can withstand the storm, where if you build a house on sand and a storm comes, it gets washed away, and I think a lot of people, again, going back to the flashy exercises you see, it's really cool, right? And again, you might not get hurt that one time you do it, but if you don't have that foundation of strength, that firm foundation, eventually something's going to catch up to you and hurt yourself. And this is a key principle I always teach with my athletes, because again, all these world-class athletes, eventually they get a little bit tired of the basics and they want to try something flashy. And it's okay to do variations and stuff, but again, when we're juggling kettlebells on Bosu balls, that's where I draw the line, right? And so one thing I always try to tell to my athletes is we train for oh shit moments, we don't live in oh shit moments, right? So like when you see an athlete make a cut and maybe the turf comes up, their knee is so strong and stable that it can withstand that, oh shit, I'm in a really bad position right now, but we don't want to live in that juggling kettlebell world, because that's an oh shit thing and you don't want to spend too much time there. But if you do the basics, if I'm squatting full depth, if I'm rowing and I'm doing all of these things, pressing in different variations at different loads and different angles at different times of the year, you're ready for an oh shit moment, and that's one of the things I really look at is like, it's really cool to train an athlete. Or again, I work with some musicians too. And one of my clients is in a band, right? He's the lead singer of One Republic. And it's like, the dude loves to jump off, the speakers. He's got to be
Yeah,
ready to absorb, 4 to 8 times his body weight. And so it's just planning for those things, because oh shit is going to happen and you've got to be ready for it. But again, I'm not having him do all these crazy jump variations. It's like, we're doing basic landings, we're squatting, and guess what? That the body adapts to that and allows him to do crazy stuff when he's on stage.
that's awesome. I love that. Those are great analogies. And like, just to kind of piggyback off of that, like one of the best ones I learned from, from one of my mentors, Lauren Landau, who's now the, performance director up at Notre Dame.
I was wondering if there was a connection with the Denver thing with Lauren. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I worked with him for years. That's how I got like, kind of my foot in the door doing like NFL combine training. I learned so much. Just an incredibly smart, genuine human being.
Were you at the Muscle Farm facility up there in Denver by chance?
I'd been there multiple times. So he had his own individual facility that was actually attached to muscle activation techniques. So MAT, which I'm sure you've had athletes that have done that. Peyton Manning was always in there. Like that's where he came to get his neck fixed when he was in Denver. And so, and then, yeah, they had the Muscle Farm stuff with all the UFC connections up there. So that was a really cool experience, to see all that. And that facility was nuts, man. They had all the Kaiser.
Yeah, they actually moved to LA for a little bit, and I was there. So I was there for like 3 years, and then that's a whole nother story. What happened with that company? But,
no doubt. We'll talk about that one off air.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, like coming back to Lauren, one thing he always said was like, how do you become tolerant to snake bite? Small doses of venom, right? And so the idea there is like for an athlete, they're going to have these crazy situations, these complex situations where you can't always necessarily train for it. Like you can try to model some aspects of it, but you got to build the resilience of the tissue and the rest of the body to be able to handle it. And so I think where a lot of people come back to is like, oh, like I see this one cool drill on the internet, this one cool thing, and then they ignore those other components that really make it possible to do those. Shit, even speaking for myself, training, right? Like, the whole functional thing, especially like 10, 12 years ago, like the Bosu ball craze, all of that, like a role for some of that, like in certain circumstances, I typically don't use them. But as an example, like I could go on and just jump on a Bosu ball, do a single leg, pistol squat without ever doing it because my foundation and all these other things, because I could squat a house, was very strong in like single leg work. Conversely, if you have somebody who just does those single leg squats on a Bosu ball, you try to put them under a loaded bar to generate a lot of force to run really fast, like chances are they're not going to succeed in that. And so you can't put the cart before the horse and think about all these sexy things until those foundations are really set. And frankly, you're really good at them. I think that's one reason specifically football players, for the most part, can build incredible physiques, can pivot to different things. Because like if you grow up playing football, like you know what you're going to do? You're going to bench, you're going to squat, you're going to power clean, you're going to deadlift. Like you're probably going to have a lot of these basic foundational things. Like, yeah, you might have some head coaches pretending to be strength coaches with some wild programming. Like we can talk about that. But for the most part, like there's a lot of really good foundational things that are built in some of those basic programs.
It was so funny you said that, because I was instantly thinking, like, again, me and you being in our 30s, I don't think we had real strength coaches in the high school area. I don't think it really popped off until probably, I'm 31 now. So I would say I graduated in 2011. That was probably right around the time, like maybe 2010, the really big schools had strength coaches. But yeah, the 5x5 this is always a funny story.
Yep.
The 5x5 was
baby.
huge. Exactly. And so my head coach, who knew nothing about lifting weights, everything was 5 sets of 5 every day across the board. So again, for the squats, we got really strong. But what was also funny is we were doing 5x5 calf raises. Just like
tricep extension. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like, what are we doing? But it was like 5x5 will get you jacked, bigger, faster, stronger. And it was like literally from tricep extensions to calf raises. That's what we were doing. And this is one thing I always note, though, is a terrible program done at 100% intensity is way better than doing a amazing program at half-ass intensity. So there was some, like, we did see some results, but it obviously, the best thing is a great program done with great intensity. That yields great results. So it was just funny, though. I always got to tell every coach the 5x5 calf raise story. It was just nuts.
That's amazing. And you know what? I grew up in Wisconsin, man. So like, we had the whole BFS thing as well. I graduated high school in like 07, but it was like, that was so popular. And then everything, so much of it was based on like Nebraska football back in the day, which I'm running a blank on his name. The strength coach there was like one of the early guys for,
was it Boyd,
NSCA.
right? Boyd Epley? Yeah.
Yep. Yep, who developed all of that, and it's just funny like how the industry has matured. But like the beautiful thing there is like 50% of that programming might have been wrong, but because you got really strong in these basic exercises, like with a 5x5, with like a probably a box squat, a power clean, and a bench press, that's most of what's going to generate results for most people, at least in the beginning stages. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And if you execute that stuff with intensity and focus, that's going to get you a lot farther than a complex program that's difficult to follow and you don't have that intensity. Like piggybacking off of that, like let's kind of pivot away from the athlete experience and training those high level athletes to, some of the people that you work with who again aren't competitive athletes. I know you work with a lot of men. And so like what are some of the lessons that you try to communicate directly from your experience working with elite level athletes that really help them optimize their performance both in the gym and out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the main thing I always try to say is, although like one of the two programs I have is like a 90-day challenge, right? Like we're just creating a lifestyle. And the whole point of that 90 days is to get you acclimated to how you want to live your life, right? And so one of the biggest things I try to teach these men is don't bite off more than you can chew, right? So if you have three kids in three different sports and you still have a full-time job, your wife's working a full-time job, don't sign up for a 5-day program just because you think that's going to get you the most jacked and most in shape, right? Like I try to tell all these people, like I'm a new dad myself, and it was a rude awakening of like, whoa, there's a lot of time that's taken back, but it's the biggest blessing in the world spending time with your kid. But you just have to get smarter about your programming, right? And this is one of the values of working with a high level coach like yourself or me, or there's a lot of other high quality caliber coaches out there, but you need someone who can design a roadmap for your life, not how your life was 5 months ago or 5 years ago, where you're at currently, right? So if 3 days a week, you probably shouldn't be doing chest, back, and legs. You probably need 3 full body programs that are designed very well. You can't just put a bunch of bullshit in there. And the main thing I always try to say is make it sustainable, right? Can you see yourself doing this 10 years from now, right? Like I hated the carnivore thing. That was huge the past 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Like, and then you see Paul Saladino come out and say like, like I'm starting to feel really bad. Like all these things are happening to me. And it's like, shocker. When you eliminate an entire food group, what happened, bud? But, so like, again, it looks cool. It looks sexy. It's trendy on IG. But if you can't see yourself going without potato or rice for 10 years, this probably isn't a good long-term thing. And so the biggest thing I try to tell these guys that you can learn from these athletes is that they're mastering the basics, they're consistent, and they don't bite off more than they can chew, right? They sign up, again, a lot of these guys do the simple things. Like if I have a session at 8 a.m., these guys come in at 7:45 and do a little extra mobility work on the ankles, knees, and hips, like wherever they need some tender love and care, right? Where a lot of but the average dad is going to roll in 2 cups of coffee feeling like crap. And so as a coach, I have to know how to program for an hour block. Like, okay, man, we're going to have to really get you warmed up before we get you into these tough sets. And I think, again, yeah, one of the biggest lessons I think is just setting yourself up for long-term success, not just a 90-day challenge.
Yeah, I think that's such an important piece, man. And like, you got my brain going back when, when we had our daughter, and I got a gym in my house, man. Like I can generally make time for training, whenever I really need to. And obviously I have additional incentive to do so, being that it's my vocation to coach people and frankly stay jacked, to have the image that we want. But like even with that, like my wife's incredibly active. She's a competitive runner. It was like I pulled back my training. When you're in that survival stage as a new parent, like you wake up at 2 a.m, you're like, fuck, one of us has to do it, but we're going to make it happen. It was like 35, 40 minutes, 3 days a week, right? Total body. And it was like that for months. And like gradually it became more. But like the important thing is do what you can when life is chaotic, not what you can do when life is perfect. Because if you have a program that's unbalanced, one, if you don't feel like you're completing it to its fullness, a lot of people are going to feel mentally dejected and feel like a failure. Second, you're going to have imbalances that develop both in terms of muscular development because you're probably skipping leg day. And third, like there's going to be injuries that kind of crop up because of this unbalanced approach. And so it's always better to do a little bit less, but lock in that consistency versus biting off more than you can chew. And I think that's very difficult, I think, in a lot of cases. Again, generally speaking, people who hire coaches are going to be driven individuals, right? And so they're going to want to bite off more than they can chew. They want to get the most out of their investment. And sometimes the feeling or the belief is like doing more work, but in many cases it's not, because as soon as that training outpaces your ability to recover, it becomes frankly detrimental to your progress, and it takes up more of the time that you're already strapped for.
Yeah, no, I think I agree. And it's like, again, I think as men, we're wired to chase and conquer things, right? And so it's like, no, I can do that. I can do that. But the truth is, it's like, It's okay to be tired. It's okay to only have 20 minutes, and you just have to take the step back and let the ego aside and say, dude, again, my kid was someone who was a terrible sleeper and still is, quite frankly. And so it's one of those things to where I know in this current phase, and I think this is a really good lesson that I learned from like a kind of like a holistic coach and holistic lifestyle, is like, just as the earth has seasons, there's different seasons in your life, right? Like there's going to be seasons where you can get after it, like, you know, like there's summer when it's nice and sunny, and the winter is a completely opposite feeling. And that's what makes the earth and life so special, right? Is when you're in that season of becoming a new dad, or work is just extra stressful, or whatever might be going on, it's not the time to probably go all in on this crazy fitness plan, but that at the same time, that doesn't mean give up on your fitness. It just builds a plan that's sustainable, right? And it's constantly changing for me. And again, another philosophy of mine is lift different loads at different intensities, at different angles, at different rep sets and tempos at different times of the year. And you're setting yourself up pretty good doing that, you know?
Yeah, especially because most people want to be the triple threat. They want to be strong, they want to be jacked, they want to be athletic, right? And so it's like if you want that, you have to program for it in that way. And like when you look at the programming for athletes, you know, a lot of times it's these different cycles throughout the year. You've got your preseason, which is kind of ramping up speed and power. You've got your in season, it's lower volume because you're stressed for everything else a little bit higher. So like the equivalent to that to a normal person, say an accountant, it could be during accounting season, right? Then you have, you know, maybe you have your off season, and that could be broken into two blocks. Maybe you have a lower intensity deload because you're trying to recover from everything. And then maybe you have a strength hypertrophy kind of basis. Whereas the way that a lot of people approach training these days, especially as it's become, you know, more in vogue, and seems like almost everybody wants to showcase a lift on Instagram these days. It's like you got people who are training as if every single lift is a competition, right? And it's like you never giving your body that time to recover. You're not giving it that ability to actually recuperate and to, you know, fully experience the growth and the development that you could otherwise. And so I think it just requires a lot of perspective on the way that we approach training as we get older, as our lives change, as our stress changes, and all these different factors, to really stay in alignment with what we can recover from, what our body can actually handle at that particular moment.
Yeah, and here's a good example, just talking about programming and things like that. So when these guys go into the season, one thing that I kind of learned is like each week these guys' bodies are getting beat up more and more, right? So like week 1 looks a lot different than week 18. And if you don't adjust the volume in the weight room, again, always try to keep that intensity high. But if we started out with maybe like 4 sets of 5 at, like, let's say we're working up to 83% or something, and then by week 18 it might even be 4 sets of 1 at just 80%, just acclimating the body still. But that's the thing, is like we don't see that on Instagram. And so carrying that over to like real life is like, man, I'm high on this new baby, but by like 3 months in, you are just beat up. And so your body's aching, you're tired. You've got to adjust to that, you know. And to give these guys a real life example, like again, just any lineman is probably squatting north of 500 pounds easily, right? And so
Yeah.
whenever these guys come to me, that as soon as they're beat up after week 18, you know, they might take a month off. Like we're working on just basic things. Like we're probably goblet squatting 3 or 4 weeks before we dive right into a front squat variation or something like that. And it takes a long time for us to ramp back up until we, again, I'll probably send them off what they left off doing, again, north of 500, and hopefully it's moving faster and smoother. But there's no need to just go right into that Goggins mindset. We're going to max out right after week 18 because you don't know what life's going to throw at you. Like, it sounds really cool, and Goggins is a badass motivational guy, but it's not necessarily the best thing. And you see his body's taking a beating for it, you know? And yeah, so I think that's my 2 cents on that, is like you have to program for life. And just because you have to do a 20-minute workout or 30-minute workout, it doesn't make you less jacked or less strong. And it's kind of shocking to me, like when I dropped down to a 3-day full body and couldn't keep up with other things on the off day, if I just supplemented with long walks and really kept my diet in order, my physique did not change that much, you know. And that was a very impressive thing to learn. And they always say experience is the best teacher, you know. And so as long as you're getting after it like 3 days of the week with really good programming, getting a couple long walks in, which is not hard, throw your kid in a stroller and go, or strap them up. Big fan of the human weight vest. And then follow your
Yeah.
diet. You're good to go.
Yeah. And you mentioned, again, like bringing your kids along and doing all that stuff. Like I find that to be such an important thing. And like with our daughter, I mean, we're always going for walks. Now she's riding her bike and doing all that stuff. And it's like just integrating them into small habits and actions and things that we do throughout the day, because one, like they're going to model the behaviors that they see. And that's really what builds their foundation for health. But it's also like it's a fun way to engage as a family where, again, not to get off like on a parenting tangent, like, but I just get a little bit sad when I just see parents like, here's a screen and it's like hours a day, or you see a, a family that's, they resort to going to the screen, whenever they go out to dinner, which again, like who hasn't done that before? But when it's, you see somebody who's sitting down at dinner and there's no interaction between anybody for an hour, that really, one, that kind of irks me. But like getting back to the activity level component is like, yeah, if you can integrate your kids into it, like think of all the things that they're experiencing. And it can be like they're noticing things in the sky, like taking my daughter on, she wants to go see alligators that are in her neighborhood, like not too close, but like
Yeah.
it's these all these little experiences like where they're getting active and they're seeing these experiences and they're kind of appreciating health and movement in a different way that's really going to set them up, I think, incredibly well for the rest of their life. And I think that's an important component as well. And I'm sure as a dad for you, you're like, man, I really want to model the right things so my kids do it. And I think that's also a huge motivator for a lot of people to really step into that role as a parent that they want to be able to experience and pass on.
Yeah, I think my whole world kind of it didn't get flipped upside down, but it just opened to me about how important it is leading a good example, right? Like again, as a husband and believer, like my job is to lead my family in the best way anyway, but when you hand me this adorable baby girl, it becomes more clear, right? And so the stuff I see is just mind blowing sometimes. And like I saw on social media the other day, a kid that was like under the age of like 1 died because a mom was feeding it Mountain Dew because that was the only way to get it to eat. And it's just so sad. And it's like, we know that food equals your mood, right? And food is fuel. We eat for performance, not pleasure. And so again, just instilling these little mindsets and little things from the beginning pay off dividends, like I remember eating TV dinners and like microwaving all this
Yeah,
plastic
maybe.
stuff. It's just nuts, but now it's like it's so cool to see like when I can put a small piece of steak on my kid's plate and she just lights up because she's getting a little bit of lean healthy meat, versus like something that's ultra processed or something. And so again, you kind of want to just set your kid up for success. And I think someone told me this a long time ago, and I find it to be so true. An all-in fitness plan is the best form of personal development, right? You learn so much. And so if you can just teach your kids young about the reward of like going outside in nature and seeing how that changes your mood and what the sunlight does to you, it really does go a long way.
Yeah, it's about, again, like just tying those little experiences in. And again, like even with our gym, my daughter will go out there and like, she'll be playing with her babies and stuff like that, like kind of around it. And like, then there's sometimes like I'm in there training and I got to put my headphones in. I don't think she wants to listen to Rick Ross, but like she'll be out like drawing, doing chalk and all that stuff. And like, it was actually funny the other day, I was doing RDLs. It was like a PR set. And she's like, I picked it up and she's like, Daddy, do you need help? I'm like, nope. And 3 reps in, she rips like this pink fuzzy ball like right at my feet
Oh my
and just
gosh.
starts laughing. I'm like, I can't be mad, man. She's like 3.5, almost 4. But I'm like, oh, there goes my distraction. But like, again, she's just like seeing these things and like building these habits and behaviors and these mindsets. And it's never going to be perfect. Do I give in to a snack and some of that stuff with my kids? Hell yeah, like I do, and I want them to be able to enjoy that. But like when they see us eating healthy consistently, and then they start to integrate those behaviors, that becomes the norm. And so I think leading from the front is one of the most important things that we can do. And it's not always easy, and you can't beat yourself up too hard if you're not perfect, because none of us are. But ultimately, if we can start taking those steps to take control of our health, to lead by that example, we are setting a great foundation for the future and for the rest of our family, and to be in a position where we leave the world in a better place than what it is when we came in.
100%. What just popped in my head is that like 80/20 principle applies to all aspects of life, right? Like I think if I can be disciplined with my diet 80% of the time, I'm going to see the results I want. If I'm having a terrible work week and I got 80% of my workouts done with 80% intensity, I'm doing okay, and I'm not going to be a perfect father, but if I'm a great father 80% of the time, the world's moving in the right direction, and I think so many people try to have that 100% mentality, and the second they make a mistake, they just give up and bounce to the next thing, right? It's like carnivore, I'm all in, and a week later you decide you want potatoes, and then you switch over to this other diet, and then this other
The potato
diet,
diet.
or yeah, exactly, or it's like, yo, this bodybuilder taught me this, and then the next week I hop over here, and it's like you're not giving your body any time to build consistency and build an adaptation and stimulus. And it's like it goes with anything, man. Like you want to get really successful, you got to do something for a long time. You want to get in shape, you got to do it for a long time. You can't just program hop, you can't career hop. And so again, I'm a big believer in that 80/20 principle. And again, if you can ramp it up to 100% certain times, that's great, but if you can just stay at 80 and coast, you're doing just fine too.
Dude, like that's where I stay most of the time, man. It's like 80%. And like, for example, like nutritionally, like, yeah, I'll be 80%. Like I'll be able to fit things in that I enjoy. Like today, like I can tell you what my food's gonna be. It was like some overnight oats with protein and raspberries, and I had a greens drink. And like for lunch, I'm gonna have some like chicken that was prepped, some rice and some veggies. And then like my workout is gonna be like a piece of fruit and some protein and pre-workout. And then my dinner is gonna be pizza. Why? Because I love pizza. It's a non-negotiable, right? Fit it every week. Like Wednesdays, ice cream date with my daughter, but the rest of the day, it's really dialed in. So it's like kind of looking at those things that really, really help you across the board. Now, Matt, I want to have a little rapid fire session. So I'm going to ask you a number of questions and just try to think about the first thing that really comes to mind. Short and punchy. Let's let it rip. You ready?
Bring it on. Let's go.
Most overrated trend in the fitness industry right now.
TRT is the first thing that popped in my head. Everyone's just jumping on it, you know?
Yeah, it's like get your blood work done first and have that for a semblance of time before you can make a judgment, and maybe go to bed before midnight.
100%.
All right. Best piece of advice for guys over 30 in the gym.
Don't skip leg day.
Love it. Best nutritional piece of advice for men.
Follow your diet 80% of the time, 20% eat whatever the hell you want.
Love it. Best book you've read or listened to recently.
I would say The Richest Man in Babylon. I was just talking about this with my financial advisor. Just popped in my head. That's a great read. And then the Bible. Those are two ones I just always recommend to everyone.
I love that. Strange one here. What's the most unusual thing on your bucket list?
Unusual thing. That's a tough one. I don't really have like a bucket list. I guess unusual thing. I don't know.
Something you've wanted to do, but you haven't done.
Get the hell out of LA. I live a very simple life. I'm trying to think to be honest with you, the bucket list item would be to probably own a farm, you know, like I'm Mississippi boy in LA. I mean, that's not unusual though. I don't want to go skydiving. I don't care to, I wouldn't be afraid to, I just have never wanted to do that. I don't think I really have a crazy thing, but let me spin this on you. What's the unusual thing you got real quick? Go ahead. Rapid fire. Let's make this good.
Man, flipping it over. I like that. Honestly, man, like I really want to go paragliding.
Okay.
Yeah. Something I've never done. It seems somewhat terrifying, but I feel like you would also feel so alive because to an extent, like you are taken by the whims of frankly what the weather is like. I'm not terrified of heights, but like I'm not a huge fan at the same time. So anything I can do that stretches me outside my comfort zone physically, mentally is something I want to lean into.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And again, I work with a bunch of Navy SEALs, and every month we do these mental toughness events, right? And so one of them said this, and I was like, that's actually a really good piece of advice. He said, every 6 months you should do something that's really, really challenging and really, really hard, you know? And again, it could be running a 5K for some people if you've never ran. For other people, it could be doing something a lot harder and a lot more extreme, you know? And so I think the paragliding thing is don't be afraid to do the things that scare you, you know, and you should kind of run towards those things. Not, again, like I think not calling out David Goggins or anything, but it's like every day should be hard every day. That's not true. But every 6 months, so we're not staying stuffed and in that comfort zone. Like if you know you're really slacking on that diet, track your calories for 30 days, you know, and it's like whatever it might be, run that 5K, do that really hard thing, you know, and so
it's only a short time.
Awesome. You know? Exactly. Yeah.
Love that. All right. Final question here. You are on death row. You get one last meal. You can eat, drink, whatever you want. What are you going to have?
Eat, drink, whatever I want. Let's go. I'm probably going, there's this thing in LA. It's called Bangin' Buns. It's this like really hot chicken sandwich. I'm probably doing that with a slice of some New York pizza on the side, and then getting you like a good brownie or two. Big dessert guy. And then to drink, let me go. What do I want to wash that down with? Give me a good glass of red wine to go with that. Let me live a little. I think that's good.
I like that. A little bougie with the wine, but man, I'll accept that. Like red wine is something about it, man.
It felt right. I don't even know when the last time I drank wine was, but in that situation on death row, I think I want some wine. Why not?
Hey, why not, man? Like, hey, you can't take it with you and you're going to die anyway. So might as well have a little fun.
Might as well, man.
Awesome. Matt, this has been an excellent conversation. I feel like we could just shoot the shit all day. You know, where can we find out more about you?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on social. You guys can go to Matt Blank Fit on Instagram. I'm pretty active on there. Website, www.the923life.com. Again, I'm all about helping Men level up, chase down the best version of themselves. Obviously, a lot of you guys are following Eric. He's a tremendous resource, someone I look up to, and I'm just thankful to be on the podcast, man.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. Everybody, make sure you go check out Matt. He is an incredible coach. Great content coming out on the daily. Make sure you give him a follow. And if you have any questions for him, just slide up in those DMs and fire away.
Slide up in there, man. I appreciate you, Eric.
All right, you too, buddy. Catch you soon.
Have a good one.
Hey, it's Eric here again. Now, there are 3 ways that I can help you look great naked. Number 1, if you want to grab a free copy of the Look Great Naked protocol to help you lose body fat without counting calories, then go to bachperformance.com/free training. Number 2, if you're a busy guy looking to build muscle, then I recommend checking out our Minimalist Muscle Blitz, which has helped over 1,000 men build muscle without living in the gym. Just go to minimalistmuscleblitz.com. The link will also be available in the show notes. Or number 3, and last, if you want to work with me directly and get the best results possible, apply at bachperformance.com/coaching to look great naked without living in the gym. Until next time, my friend,